Okay, let's talk about the massive shakeup happening right now in diabetes tech. I mean, this is a huge story. It's all about corporate strategy, some serious pressure, and what happens when two giants in the field decide to, well, completely flip the script. So get this, two of the absolute biggest names out there, Medtronic and Ypsomed, have just announced they're spinning off their entire diabetes divisions. Yeah, you heard that right. The whole thing.
And that right there, that's the big puzzle, isn't it? I mean, on the surface, this just doesn't make any sense. These aren't failing businesses. They're actually growing. So today, we're going to play detective. We're going to follow the clues and see if we can solve this billion-dollar mystery.
All right, first up, let's zoom in on the big one at the center of this puzzle, the mid-tech giant Medtronic. I mean, just look at this number. Medtronic's diabetes division is an absolute heavyweight. We're talking about $2.8 billion in annual revenue. And it's not like it's stagnant. It's been seeing double-digit growth recently. So the question is, why on earth would you walk away from that? Okay, let's really get into it. Because our first big clue, it's not about how much money they were making. It's all about how much of that money they were actually keeping. And this is really the heart of the issue right here. You see this contrast? The top-line revenue, the growth, it all looked fantastic on paper. But behind the scenes, the division was consistently missing its internal profit targets. And for a huge company like Medtronic, a company with these super high margin divisions in things like cardiovascular tech, that kind of underperformance, it really, really stands out. So you gotta ask, where was all that profit going? Well, first, they were pouring money into R&D, basically playing catch-up with their competitors. Then you had some pretty big regulatory costs, especially after getting some heat from the FDA. And then there's just, the reality of being a small part of a giant corporate machine. It's just hard to be nimble and efficient. And what's wild is that we see the exact same story playing out with the Swiss company Ypsomed. Look at this. Their diabetes division had this insane 51% revenue growth. But it still ended up with an operating loss of over 20 million Swiss francs, all while their other division was chugging along, profitable and growing. It's the same pattern, identical. Okay, so the key thing to realize here is that this internal pressure on profits, that was only part of the story. There were also these huge threats closing in from the outside. To put it simply, Medtronic was just falling behind in the tech race. Their big flagship pump, the MiniMed 780G, got stuck in these really long regulatory delays here in the US. Plus, those FDA warnings we mentioned, that definitely hurt their credibility. And for years, their whole closed ecosystem approach just frustrated users who wanted their devices to, play nice with other products. And all this time, nimbler competitors like Dexcom, Tandem, and Insulet were just racing ahead. But maybe the biggest threat of all, the real game changer, came from a new class of blockbuster drugs. I'm sure you've heard the names, Ozempic, Mounjaro. We're talking about GLP-1s. And they are completely rewriting the rules for how diabetes is treated, especially for people with type 2. And the impact here is just profound. Because these drugs reduce the need for insulin, they are literally shrinking the future market for pumps and monitors. Think about that. All that massive growth device makers were banking on from the type 2 market, suddenly it's at risk. And that forces them to rethink their entire long-term strategy from the ground up. Okay, so let's tie this all together. How does this solve our mystery? Well, when you put all these clues on the table, the low profits, the tough competition, and this massive disruption from GLP-1s, suddenly the spin-off doesn't look like a surrender anymore. It starts to look a lot more like a strategic reboot. For a company like Medtronic, spinning the division off with an IPO, an initial public offering, starts to make a ton of sense. First, the new company is on its own, so it can move way faster and adapt to what customers actually want. Second, it can go out and raise its own money directly from investors who believe in its mission. And finally, it gets to be valued on its own merits as a focused diabetes tech company, which could unlock a ton of value that was just kind of buried inside the giant parent company. And I love how the Diabetic blog puts it. This is a reboot, not a retreat. See, the goal here isn't just to make the same old devices a little more efficiently. Nope. The goal is to create a totally new kind of company that's built for the future. We're talking digital first, with open systems that work with everything, and using AI to make care truly personal. So this whole thing leaves us with one huge final question. Is this move the birth of a new breed of leaner, more innovative diabetes companies? Companies that can finally pivot and focus on what consumers really want? Or is this just a clever way for the giant parent companies to sidestep a really tough future and basically let someone else deal with the headache? The answer? Well, that's going to rate the next chapter of diabetes care.